I'm going to show you how to make customized candies, like I did of my professor when I brought in his head on a plate for class as a joke. Now, I'm going to show you how to make your own food molds and your own candy for about $30 US. I suggest using white chocolate chips or butterscotch chips if you haven't worked with candy before. Our mold is going to be made out of amazing mold putty. You can get it at Michael's Craft Store or from their .com, and it's $20. Really, really great stuff. And the shape that your final candy is going to be sculpted first out of Sculpy. Sculpy is an oven-baked clay, and you just make a shape, stick it in the oven, half an hour later or whatever, you come out with something like this. And I sculpted that with my fingers, burned it, and it still worked really well.
So when you make the mold, you don't have to use a whole lot of silicone putty. The mold you see here was made from the amount that you see to the right. All you've got to do is mix it together and press it over the surface of the object that you want to make a mold of. You can also make a pile of the putty and then imprint the object into the mold. I'll show you in a second. So I've mixed the putty together, and there's lots of tips on how to do that. Just whatever you do, make sure you mix it in under a minute. And now I'm just smoothing the putty over the surface of my object. I'm leaving a lump of putty here so I can turn it over and lay it flat on a non-porous surface. That way my mold will be perfect for pouring chocolate into. So now my silicone is curing. It's becoming hard and solid around my object. When mixing it, you'll feel it give off a little heat as it chemically reacts and hardens. I've placed it on a solid, non-porous surface, in this case an old plastic container, and I'm going to let it sit for 25-45 minutes, whatever it says on the packaging. Some silicone putties harden very quickly, 2 or 3 minutes, like this one. But when you have a silicone putty that cures very quickly, see how thick this mold is compared to this one? It takes more material because you have less time to work with the silicone and spread it over the surface. But what if you need a thick mold? What if you need strength in the silicone for a large molding application? In this case, this thin little mold will hold the candy I'm going to mold with fine. But what if I'm going to do a big piece? Well, you don't need to make a really thick mold if you're going to do a big piece. All you have to do is get some plaster of Paris and say, I don't know, an old container, and lay down some plaster of Paris, lay down your piece, and voila! You have a cheap supporting layer of plaster of Paris supporting your silicone mold. Alright, I'm going to let this thing cure and then show you candy making.
For the candy making, there's our candy bottles that you can buy from craft stores or baking stores, and I put the chips in, packed them down, and then put them in a bowl of hot water to warm them and melt them. But you don't have to use those candy squeezers. In this case, I tested out using an old syringe, a big old syringe that I had left over from veterinary medicine stuff, and it worked fine for applying candy. You just put your candy in the mold. If you have trouble with air bubbles, tap it on the ground a few times, and your bubbles will rise up into the candy, making a nice smooth texture on the front. And so here you see a finished candy and the model it came from. If you don't want to wait for your silicone mold to cure, you can dip it in hot water and you can cut the curing time down to just a couple minutes.
Here's where a small air bubble left a tear in the bottom of the mold that goes all the way through to the inside. To patch holes or small tears in a mold, it's very easy. Just mix up some more putty and place it over the mold. In this case, since it's all the way through, I've also placed a little chunk on the inside of the nose. I'll replace the original into the mold, tamp it down and squish it in place, and then let it set for another 25 minutes, curing and filling the hole.